Today, I'm so happy to welcome my guest, Dr. Ira Byock. Ira's a repeat guest who's joined me several times in the past. We always have great discussions, and I'm so glad he's here today, but we're talking about a totally new subject today. But Ira is a leading palliative care physician, author, and public advocate for improving care through the end of life. He's the founder and chief medical officer for the Institute for Human Caring of Providence St. Joseph Health. And most of you listening probably know him as the author of Dying Well, The Four Things That Matter Most, and The Best Care Possible. But you can learn more about Ira and his books and his work at irabyock.org. So Ira, hello, and thank you so much for joining me again today.
Hi, Karen. Nice to see you. It's good. It's good to be back with you.
Yes, yes. So nice to talk with you again today. And I'm really excited because we have a totally new subject, which I know is of interest to you, to talk about the use of psychedelics and their application for palliative care patients, patients at the end of life. And so I'm excited to learn from you because it's something I myself don't have any experience with or knowledge about. So would you just start by telling us how you got interested in learning more about psychedelics and studying them?
So this is about as improbable a topic as any that I could imagine, but I find myself talking about it more and more, and devoting some significant professional activity toward it. I was introduced to psychedelics like many millions of people my age during the late 1960s and early 1970s when drug exploration was part of the culture of colleges and young people in general. The Vietnam War was happening, and in that exploration, very much in the spirit of drinking wine and smoking pot, I took a dose of LSD. It was December of 1969, and it is not an exaggeration to say it was a life-changing experience. It was not an intoxication by any stretch of the imagination. It was this profound sense of an altered state of consciousness, a state of heightened clarity of consciousness, in which a lot of the stuff that I had taken for granted, all of a sudden I got to revisit all of the assumptions about myself, about my relationship to the world, about how things work, about expectations, all of a sudden, in a sense, started to dissolve and then become available for decision. That while some other people my age did in fact use psychedelics, sometimes called hallucinogens, though it's a misnomer, as a recreational drugs for concerts and partying. For myself, I'll just speak for myself, though I think it was the case for many other people. It was never that. It was something utterly profound that offered a larger and meaningful context of myself in relation to others in the world. During this time, however, psychedelics became highly politicized and controversial. The Vietnam War was going on. It's fair to say that virtually none of and there was a draft, right, which is very different than what's going on today. For those people who are too young to have lived through it, this sense of at least the men, but I also think women my age as well, that one could be criminalized simply for not wanting to go and fight in Vietnam. That happened to me. And it's fair to say that none of us who ingested psychedelics volunteered for the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed absurd that we would be asked to pick up a rifle and go fight people we had never met and were demonstrably of no threat to us, simply because the government thought it was a good idea. President Nixon and Attorney General John Mitchell and all of that whole apparatus realized pretty early on that there was something about these drugs particularly that were causing a counterculture, and demonstrations in the streets, and things really got very politically dicey in ways that while today's situation may be as extreme in terms, from my personal perspective, in terms of governmental overreach and misdeeds, the fact that there's no draft now, the fact that it's not personal for millions of young men and their families, their parents and their sisters and lovers, I think it explains why there's not that in the streets response, but there was then. And so these drugs were criminalized way out of proportion to their danger to the American public. I'm going to switch gears here and say that, those of us who began to look at psychedelics realized there was a lot to study here. These drugs have been they are plant-based largely, and mushrooms and cacti and things of that nature. They've been used for as far back as there is human history by indigenous peoples across the globe, frankly, usually in ceremonies that have religious base or spiritual base, because again, this ingestion, the altered states that these drugs evoke have at least a strong impression of putting one in touch with a larger sense of reality and ultimate reality, and a kind of a noetic sense of knowing, not knowing through learning or knowledge, but learning about things through direct experience.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1950s and 1960s, after Albert Hofmann synthesized LSD while looking for a vasoactive substance, there's in Switzerland, Sandoz, a famous Sandoz chemist, synthesized this a few years later, inadvertently had a psychedelic experience with LSD. Sandoz began to explore what the potential therapeutic utility of LSD was through the psychiatric community, and these were made freely available to psychiatrists around the world, including in the United States. And psychiatrists, legitimate mainstream psychiatrists, were using them in a variety of ways. In retrospect, using them naively, often with very little preparation and guidance, trying to see what they would do to people, or whether they would have any value therapeutically for people. The learning curve was steep. They did seem to help people even with little preparation, some people. But there was a significant amount of research in a very deliberate way that happened in Maryland at the Spring Grove psychiatric facilities under the auspices of the National Institute of Mental Health. This is in the mid to late 60s and even into the early 70s. And of particular interest to our colleagues in hospice and palliative medicine, the research focused on people with advanced cancer. The interest was in could researchers, could the psychiatrists mostly and psychologists doing this research impact the sense of depression, anxiety, and loss of meaning, what we would now call demoralization, that was so common in patients with advanced cancer. And while there's a significant variety of the ways of the research models and the therapeutic models, what evolved was a careful preparation to let people know that they were going to be given something that would have a profound impact on them, and then supporting them through the 6 or 8 or 10 hours of the experience with um, with caring presence, with aesthetic and surroundings of drapes and flowers, a rose, um, um, with good music, usually light classical music, or even some fugues at times, to kind of that evoke a sense of things larger than oneself. And the results during those early papers, which you can still read, of course, were quite dramatic. They people who had a sense of being depression, having sense of nothing to look forward to, just waiting to die, life having lost all meaning, would talk about the profound sense of inherent meaning of life, the sense that every moment is precious, the value of being alive in this moment today. Having a sense of, they would go forward from this remarkable single experience with a sense that their life had been reframed, that there was something different, and that whatever the length of life, their sense of value of every moment of life had been heightened. Even at that time, with the research sort of survey tools being rudimentary, most of this being done, like a lot of the psychiatric research at the time, being done by case reports or grouped case reports that were kind of qualitatively described. Those patients who could be followed over time, this change in perspective and renewed or new sense of life having profound meaning endured, and in fact, for some people, actually grew over time rather than dissipating. So that was happening, and I know you've asked a question of how I got involved. Well, I later, went to medical school and put all of this aside, but I kept reading the research, and was aware that this had a profound effect on me, and I wasn't depressed, but I certainly I wouldn't have gone to medical school, frankly, had I not had the epiphany that this is what I wanted to do, partly through psychedelic insights. All of that research came to an abrupt halt in about 1976, I think, when, for political reasons, the whole class of drugs were made Schedule 1, with officially no therapeutic value and dangerous, not even to be researched. And so for a period of really 40 years, almost 35 plus years, minimal research has been done. Little bit in Europe, through some dogged persistence of some wonderful researchers, my friend Charlie Grobe from UCLA Harbor being one, people at NYU and Johns Hopkins, Bill Richards and Roland Griffith and the like. A little bit of research has been done, and now in this century, we have an opportunity to revisit this because of some much better methodologic research that has been done. Also, importantly, with people with advanced cancer showing dramatic improvements. So here we are.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I find myself wondering what would have happened had there not been those severe restrictions for 40 years, if research had been ongoing at that time and robust. And what if we'd been able to use this tool for all of these years? We might find ourselves in a very different position around end-of-life care right now, but at least here we are exploring it again. So,
well, we're in a situation now, I come to this not actually through the drug, but through the awareness that in our discipline, in the patients we serve, not uncommonly, suffering persists. Despite all of our potions and protocols, all of our cognitive behavioral therapy, our logotherapy, our dignity therapy, the outlook interventions, all of the work that I've done with life completion and all of that, which works, but it doesn't work always. And it takes time to work, and it takes substantial commitment to do that life review and to do the developmental work of life completion and legacy work and all of that. It's all good stuff. And my enthusiasm is undiminished, but I'm aware that suffering often persists, that people who are feeling demoralized, depressed, have a sense of helplessness and hopelessness, which saps their energy and their ability to commit the emotional energy to do some of that life completion work. And here is this amazing tool that in times can be life-saving, frankly. I mean, in 8 jurisdictions now, even without depression, people can access lethal, medications. We palliative care doctors can write lethal prescriptions. Isn't it time there should be a right to try these tools, which whether or not somebody eventually chooses to hasten their death, may give their life a sense of being worth living, sense of value and richness.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I had a close friend with her, experiencing her 4th recurrence of breast cancer, who traveled to Peru and met with a shaman and took ayahuasca there. And she came home a new person, in terms of just filled with this deep joy that I hadn't seen in her all the while that she dealt with that illness. And she did die from the breast cancer a few months later, but she had this new, and as you said, kind of profound awareness of being connected with everyone. Her fear was completely gone. Her ability to connect with her family with such deep love and meaning, it was amazing to see. And so, having witnessed that myself, I understand what you're talking about, that it could be completely transformative for a patient who's just lost in despair and as you said, suffering greatly as they try to navigate the end of life.
Yeah, so this is pretty exciting stuff, and I've been drawn back to this work because of my constant awareness of persistent suffering, that suffering that persists despite our best efforts. But I also am aware that for many of our colleagues, this will sound far too good to be true. And I want to address that for a moment in our conversation. I wrote a paper. So I decided, when was it? In 2018, I decided to come out of the closet, I had mentioned in various chapters I've written over the years, occasionally I drop in a little reference to psychedelics, talking about persistent depression, often talking about desire to hasten one's death, and just mentioning that, boy, there was all of this research back in the 60s and 70s, and it's sort of just abruptly stopped, and it's not even ever cited in the palliative medicine literature, which has always seemed to me to be odd. But okay, so I over the years, probably 3 or 4 times, I've put little references in chapters, but minimally. In 2018, I decided, okay, it's time. Given some of the work that has been done, the publications from NYU and from Harvard, UCLA, and Johns Hopkins, Michael Pollan, his book hadn't come out yet, but he'd written an article called "The Treatment Trap," the trip treatment in the New Yorker, and which was remarkable. And I decided to write for the palliative care community and say, isn't it time that we revisit psychedelics? And I called it "Taking Psychedelics Seriously." Mm-hmm. I make a real point in that article that if it sounds too good to be true, that's just fine. You're right to be skeptical. As palliative care doctors, we should be skeptical because there are so much snake oil people are trying to sell patients with far advanced diseases of any sort. And even some overzealous interventional colleagues will, with the best of intentions, sort of oversell a new evidence-based treatment. We're right to be skeptical, but there's a difference between skepticism and cynicism. And in this realm, I would just ask that we all keep our skepticism and read further and explore this. Let's do the research. Let's be familiar with the research to date, and then conduct research within the field of palliative medicine. But suspend your disbelief while approaching this, because this may be the exception of a ancient set of therapeutics that may have application in the contemporary world in an important way.
And what I understand, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the medication enables patients to have, I guess, what I would call a mystical experience, which is what allows them to kind of connect with something greater than themselves, to see a bigger purpose in life, to even experience awe, perhaps, and that's what is so transformative for them, because it takes them out of the smallness, I guess, and the narrowness of this realm of life, and to see something from a bigger perspective.
Yes, well stated. I've been asked to describe it because it seems just so hard to believe. And all I can say is the analogy that comes to mind is, let's say that you happen to know Elon Musk, and he dials you up one day and says, "Hey, can you take off tomorrow? I got a great opportunity for you. I'm going up in SpaceX for the day. You'll be home by evening, but I've got a seat. Why don't you come with me?" And you drive over to Elon's, the launching pad around wherever it is, San Luis Obispo or Santa Barbara, and by golly, the next day you are launched into space. And that launch is so rattling that for a while you're just shaking like incomprehensibly. And for during the liftoff, it's deeply unsettling and frightening, and you don't know if this was a good decision, and you wonder if you're going to survive this, and your head is rattling so much that you're seeing sounds and feeling colors, and then you reach escape. You're out in space and weightless, and you even have an opportunity to don a suit and walk outside, and you're enveloped by the galactic void, looking down at Earth, or is it up, with the stars behind you, feeling simultaneously infinitesimal and utterly insignificant. And yet, oh my gosh, the unbelievable ability to be alive and aware in this moment, here and now. And the sense of meaning has never been more profound. And it's this paradoxical insignificance and profound ultimate meaning. And there's this completeness in the moment, the here and now, within the limitless expanse of all that is, all that was, all that will be. It's life-changing. Mm-hmm. And within a few hours, it's time to crawl back into the SpaceX and return back to Earth. And by 8 p.m., you're in Elon's Tesla, and he's driving you home. but you're never the same. The sense of perspective, what is reaffirmed in those moments for all of the astronauts, and for most of these psychonauts, if you call it that, is that what matters most are the people in your life. But the trappings, the not only physical possessions, but the memberships and the certifications and the other stuff tends to fall away in significance, to be enjoyed perhaps, but not believed. There is a reframing that happens that reapportions priorities in one's life. And yet deepens the sense of the meaning, the inherent value and meaning of life, even in its impermanence.
Mm.
Notice that there was no tissue toxicity in the story I just told.
Mm-hmm.
There was no real intoxication
Mm-hmm.
Of the sort of that alcohol or benzodiazepines cause. And you don't have to do it every day, or you don't have to dose every day for that impact to endure. That's as close an analogy as I can get to that experience that some people have, at least, with psychedelics, that, for lack of a better term, we call mystical.
Mm. That's really beautiful, just imagining it. And I do remember reading Edgar Mitchell, the former astronaut who started
Exactly.
IONS,
Yeah.
described an experience much like that, looking out at the Earth from inside the spaceship as it was orbiting the Earth and seeing this tiny blue ball, suspended amidst the stars. And then it reminded me too, I remember I had a hospice patient who had a dream shortly before he died. And he's a man who'd been very bitter and angry about his own dying process, and angry ever since his wife had died a number of years earlier and had never gotten over that. But he had a very similar, in his dream, he said he was taken to a star where he could look down on the earth, and he saw his life unfolding and his wife's life unfolding before him. And when he saw from that bigger perspective, he suddenly saw why everything had been perfect the way it was that, and could finally accept his wife's death and could accept his own dying. And he, like my friend who took ayahuasca, he was joyful because of that dream. Now, I didn't ask him if he had mushrooms for dinner the night before, or if this was just a spontaneous dream he was fortunate enough to have. But that dream alone created that same kind of transformation for him, that same kind of experience.
Yes. So another thing that's important that we've learned through serious use of psychedelics in research settings, and what if you read the research, or I strongly recommend Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. It's a wonderful read. He's a journalist, investigative journalist, who's done just a brilliant job of distilling pertinent research, but also sort of the larger cultural context of psychedelics. Is that this is an experience, as psychedelic assisted therapeutic experience, in which one's expectations and one's preparation strongly influence the experience itself and its therapeutic outcome. So I'm not diminishing the experience at all to say people become highly suggestible. And frankly, that's just part of who we are as a human animal. The Hawthorne effect, if you will, is alive and well and can be exploited for therapeutic benefit. So we talk about the importance of set and setting, set being the expectations, your intentions of taking this medication and having this experience. It's important that be therapeutic, that you're taking the uh, psilocybin or LSD or whatever, ayahuasca, with the intention of deepening your experience, of lessening depression if you have depression, of lessening your anxiety or your PTSD, and that you're understanding that this may be an uncomfortable experience, that the therapeutic value may include facing fears of death, of ego dissolution, of the sense of annihilation, in a sense, a psychological annihilation, that people often visit things that are fearful for them, history of or memories of deeply troublesome relationships and the like. There's a way of getting through that that's part of the preparation. Um, being able to trust in the entire experience, knowing there will be people with you who can guide you through it, that ultimately you're going to come out of this safely, that the anxiety or the fears within this, again, are the way through it is indeed through it, not around it. And in so doing, with that set in setting, the likelihood of therapeutic effect of people saying this was an important experience that I feel much better than is very high, in the 80% range. It's not outrageous to say. Not everybody has a profound, ultimate mystical experience, but a large majority of people come through this saying, boy, this was an important and therapeutically valuable experience.
And so I hear you saying that the preparation is really important. And also, so you said the set and setting, but having the right person with you as a guide who knows what they're doing and guiding you. So as a disclaimer, that we're not encouraging people to go out on the streets and
no, in fact, I'm discouraging that. And I was one who did it in the day, but I would strongly discourage that, because this is not a martini. This is not pot. This is not Adderall or Valium. This is serious stuff, and people need to be screened for it. There are certain personality types and certain psychiatric diagnoses, schizoid diagnoses particular, that can be where a person's condition may be very adversely affected by a psychedelic. It is not a recreational drug, and particularly during that liftoff phase, that time of where the rising phase of the drug in our bloodstreams or neurotransmitters, it's dangerous, and people need to be in a safe environment. Psychomotor work is completely disrupted. People have these things called synestheses, where senses are blurred, so that you are tasting sound and seeing feelings and all of that. That can occur. It doesn't happen always or in every experience, but it's common, and not abnormal. It passes, but people have to be protected. I should also say that it's important not only for people to be guided and supported during this, if you have to be sure that this is going to be a safe and therapeutically beneficial experience, but also have time to meet after the experience with counselors who are adept at these experiences, so that you can begin to integrate with talking with somebody who gets it, what just happened to you. Because otherwise it's strange to talk to people about. They it sounds like, what are you talking about? You had what happened? You have to talk to people who actually know it.
Yeah, who get it, get what you're experiencing. So if someone wanted to have this experience or try this psychedelic assisted therapeutic experience, because it's still a controlled substance. Where do people go? Do they have to be part of a study in
Yes,
order
so
to?
there are a number of studies that have been going on. I mean, there are now studies happening at several centers. Unfortunately, not yet, and I've been trying to work on some of this as well, not yet within palliative medicine. There's studies going on in psychiatry around depression, around anxiety, around PTSD with veterans, for instance, in which this is a remarkably effective therapy. There was a study recently completed with patients with chronic HIV disease and demoralization syndrome. And then the other place where this is these medications and psychedelic assisted therapies are being actively researched is in addiction disorders, in alcoholism, smoking addiction, some other things. Because once again, these are patterned behaviors and patterned kind of I don't. This isn't going to sound terribly technical, but kind of closed narratives that people tell one another about in depression, why you're worthless and a failure. In anxiety, all of the internalized dangers. In addiction, this is what gives you pleasure, and this is who you are, and you've told yourself that you can't break this. This is part of who you are. All of that gets loose for many people. That it sort of dissolves for a number of hours, where you get to choose again if that is in fact who you are. This kind of, there's actually neurophysiologic substrate called the default mode network, where networks, patterns of firing of networks that I think psychologically are associated with our assumptions and unquestioned expectations about ourselves, our relationship to others, the world, all get available for inspection and decision.
And it makes sense. That includes our assumptions about death and dying, which we know are deeply ingrained in us and in our society are primarily negative and frightening and fearful. So,
right.
Yeah, I can see the potential for application here for palliative patients and hospice patients at the end of life.
So I do think it's important that this research be done. I'm very interested in looking at whether kind of what I will glibly call full dose palliative care, and I mean outpatient palliative care. If we could split a sample, do a randomized trial of people, outpatients being seen by palliative care, people with at least a life expectancy of 2 or 3 months, and split a sample of those who receive, let's say, 5 sessions of outpatient palliative care with all symptom management and care coordination and crisis prevention and early crisis management and family support, as well as the life completion stuff, the life review, the legacy work, the meaning making, please forgive me as I forgive yous, thank you as I love yous, all of that. On the one hand, it could be dignity therapy, and then all of that same, we talk about what's in the dose, what's in the syringe, all of that's in the syringe on the interventional side, with the addition of a single psilocybin assisted therapy session, let's say visit 4. And whether, when looking at scales of demoralization, depression, anxiety, global quality of life, spiritual experience scales given to each group every, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks, whether we would be able to detect a significant therapeutic signal in the group that received the psilocybin assisted therapies. I think that study needs to be done.
Yes, absolutely. And I love the thought that it's one session, a long session, a 6 to 8 hour session, but one session could change everything for that patient. And I think we all know, no matter how hard we've tried, no matter how how much we've connected with the patient and the family and the work we've done, we've all experienced those patients that we can't seem to find a breakthrough with. We can't seem to help them find peace and get to a place where they're comfortable with what they're experiencing. And so to have another tool to offer, I think would be a godsend.
I think so too. And I think in the current environment, again, with a backdrop of physician hastened death, um, I think if people have a right to die, shouldn't they have a right to try these psychedelics? Seems to me to be an obvious, um, appropriate response by the caring community to make this at least available for those who wish to try it.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're a ways away yet before we'll be able to actually use it or prescribe it for.
I think we're a ways away from prescribing. I think the FDA is being very reasonable with approving protocols. They have to be careful protocols with good outcome measures and clear indications and appropriate screening, preparation, guidance, integration, all of that. But even with it being Schedule 1, the FDA is looking seriously at research and approving some research trials. I think in addition to that, though, once psilocybin, for instance, is approved for other indications like depression or PTSD, I think we're going to our discipline is going to have to look at expanded access and compassionate use of these medications prior to formal FDA approval. And I think the FDA will probably help us in that regard as well by approving protocols for compassionate use. Remember that in Denver, Oakland, I think Santa Cruz, I just heard recently, and maybe coming in Oregon, the whole state of Oregon, there has been decriminalization initiatives passed in Denver and Oakland and in various stages, and that's an interesting situation. So people who are being cared for by palliative care clinicians and teams may come to the team and say, I have access to these mushrooms and I'm planning on using them. Will you support me? So there's that, and if we can support them with a protocol that has been developed and as a field, if we skill ourselves up so that various programs do have one or two clinicians who do have experience being a guide and counselor in both preparation and integration with people, we may advance the field in a different way than has classically been done.
That's so true. So is there a place where, say in Denver, a palliative physician could go just to get some training, do you have any thoughts about that?
So I don't know of any, and I really, I'm not being coy. I just don't know. There is the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS, does offer training to guides. It's a year and a half, I think, cohort, couple of 2 or 3 on-site sessions with the training cohort and a lot of online work and home study. But they are training guides in anticipation of these therapies being approved. And there are things. I mean, we've talked about psilocybin and LSD. MDMA, or the street name of Molly or ecstasy, is a little bit different type of a psychedelic, and has more of an emotional rather than cognitive or psychic activity. And it's being used under approved FDA protocols or research protocols for people with, let's say, PTSD. And the research protocol, again, involves guides, some of whom have been trained at CIIS. So there's a little bit of a pathway there.
Yeah. So it sounds like a dynamic situation, that things are changing and will be changing, and that hopefully there'll be even more possibilities for attaining these benefits for our patients who really need it.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be more than a handful of years before there's paths to access, legal, access of this. Right now, it is in a research realm, and I think it deserves all of our attention and support, at least to do these studies and learn more about these agents. These agents, by the way, again, they've been researched in cancer, and people with advanced cancer also have other organ systems, heart, lung, kidney, liver involvement, but they haven't been researched in the kind of palliative care population that is 40% or so of cancer, and lots of people with congestive heart failure and advanced neuromuscular disease and liver disease and multiple comorbidities, respiratory insufficiency, all of that. And I think my psychiatric colleagues get very squeamish about this notion of giving these drugs to people with congestive heart failure or respiratory problems. But for those of us in palliative care, it's like, well, that's our peeps,
Yeah.
So we need to be able to research these drugs in medically compromised patients. I frankly, everything that I know about these drugs lead me to suspect that they will be well tolerated. That the challenges are not so much cardiovascular as sort of emotional and psychological, and that we can support people through that. And the occasional person may need a dose of metoprolol or something in the midst of their session, but I don't think it's going to be terribly. I don't think it's going to be a hard stop to not offer these treatments to people with organ system involvement.
And the potential benefits are worth the exploration at the very least.
Certainly worth the research at the moment. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I will leave a link to the article that you wrote, Taking Psychedelics Seriously, for one thing. And then I should link also to Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. Anything else people should go to? Any other sources for information that you're aware of?
I would start there. I reference in my citations, I reference a number of research articles that would be of interest to those who want to read further, as does Pollan's book. It's just a brilliant book. I've been reading a lot in recent months, and actually last couple of years. There are a lot of books out there, depending on whether you want to read about the research and therapeutic work that's been done in the 1950s and 60s, some of the cultural stuff that occurred during that time as well, which of course is fascinating. All the stuff at Harvard with Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass, and Andrew Weil was in the mix back then. And there's all kinds of interesting cultural stuff. There's a Cary Grant was given LSD and found great value in it in his psychiatric counseling that he underwent. There's a Broadway show coming out that imagines a psychedelic experience with Cary Grant, Claire Booth Luce, and Aldous Huxley.
Interesting.
Yeah, Flying Over Sunset, I think it's called. So this stuff is reemerging in the culture.
Yes.
And Casey Musgrove has a popular song about psychedelics. Go figure. You
Yeah.
know, well, it goes on and on. There's a lot to read and explore if people are interested.
All right.
I should wedge in there the Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. We've developed a community forum on the safe use of psychedelic assisted therapies, SUPAT. We were going to be meeting at the Academy meeting coming up, but I don't think that's happening. So,
All right. Okay.
stay tuned.
I'll link to that too. So it's exciting. So it sounds like things are changing, and hopefully within a few years we'll see more availability and possibilities for our patients.
Yeah, we should revisit this conversation in a couple of years.
Yes, yes, definitely. I'd love to. Well, thank you as always, Ira. I really appreciate you just sharing your wisdom and your insights with all of us. And I wish you well in your work and everything that you're doing.
Thanks for doing this. Thanks for inviting me, and the podcast is fabulous. So thanks for doing that too, Karen.
Oh, you're very welcome. Well, until hopefully I'll see you before too long. And
Right. I look forward to seeing you.
be well and take care and use your hand sanitizer.
Yeah. Wash your hands and don't touch your face.
Yes, exactly. Goodbye.
Bye for now.